Hello friends, how you doing today? Doing a review, as I said I would do a review on The Mind of God, The Scientific Basis for a Rational World by Paul Davies. And I've already gone through uh, I'm about 3/4 of the way out. I'm on page 180. It's about 230 pages, so 50 pages to go. In the initial chapters, we saw how the author was going through a lot of interesting topics, and in my last video, I talked about how he mentions that the most popular explanation for the creation of the universe is still the Big Bang Theory ever since the 1920s, that they discovered that the universe is expanding in all directions. They believe that everything at one time was all in a singularity, a single point, and from there, the Big Bang, we have the universe that we have. And he agreed with Stephen Hawking that this singularity could have, because it was on a curved surface, uh, it makes a wild assumption that it created itself. So that's the only time I've found so far the author has been extremely objective in his opinions, and the only time he actually adopted someone else's opinion was with the situation with Hawking and his colleague. I should have his name here for you. Hartle and Hawking proposal, which I believe is highly arbitrary and contrived and completely unnecessary. So let's continue. He goes on for the next little while talking about a lot about mathematics and reality, and into chapter 5, real world and virtual worlds. And where he leads with this is the idea of the universe or creation or the cosmos being a simulation. So being something that is, created by anything except for the traditional concept of God. And this has become very popular, popularized by Elon Musk, who thinks that's it's more than likely that we're living in a simulation. But to just get a grasp on that explanation is simply to use another word for creation. And instead of using the word creation, they use assimilation because they are more comfortable with living within a simulation, something created by something that they can understand. So they would rather have our reality created, and by they I mean people that subscribe to this particular belief for the creation of the cosmos. They would rather have a reality based on something that was created by something like us. So they think some computer scientist far into the distant future, when technology has advanced to the point where they can create simulated worlds, they would have created this world that we're living in right now. And so one way to say it is they'd rather be created by somebody living in their mom's basement than to have to be responsible to a divine entity. It's or aliens or anything else except any kind of association with a traditional concept of God with a capital G. And so it's a word trick to simply say, well, we're probably living in a simulation because of, he goes into great length to describe how our reality is mathematically based, that most of the phenomena that we see out in the world can be explained in terms of mathematical concepts. Now, not everything can. He says that there's chaos theory and there's things that don't fit into mathematical models, but simply because our ability to explain things with mathematics is not fully developed yet. And he goes on to talk about how amazing mathematical discoveries are made in strange ways, where you have these people, this fellow from India who had amazing mathematical ability, and he just was able to pull out these mathematical formulas out of thin air, and they only became proven through rigorous analysis many years later. Or another example were these savants who seem to be mentally incapable in many other ways, but had these amazing mathematical abilities. He says that this points towards the idea that these mathematical proofs and theorems and concepts are eternally existent, underlying an explanation for our reality. It's a long discourse, and it's really not that interesting unless you happen to be a mathematician. And so I didn't spend too much time on that. But I did pull out a couple of parts that I wanted to talk about, that, you know, they say that most, I'm just going to pull this out from page 159 here. He says, most scientists have tacitly assumed that an approximately non-quantum world would have emerged automatically from the Big Bang, even from a Big Bang in which quantum effects dominated. And that makes sense in the previous stuff that he's talking about, so I'm not going to try and explain that here. Recently, however, Hartle and Gell-Mann have challenged this assumption. They argue that the existence of an approximately classical world in which well-defined material objects exist at distinct locations in space and in which there is a well-defined concept of time requires special cosmic initial conditions. Now, remember I said before about the firework analogy for the creation, for the Big Bang, requires special cosmic initial conditions. This is what I had been talking about. And so these guys, Hartle and Gell-Mann, I would agree with their assumptions as opposed to most scientists. So the reason why I wanted to mention this is because to explain that there is still a lot of disagreement between these people who are scientists, who are physicists or mathematicians. They bounce these theories back and forth, and sometimes they agree with this guy, and sometimes they disagree, and sometimes they come up with their own ideas, and so on and so forth. And so we shouldn't be intimidated by ideas simply because they're coming from physicists or mathematicians. I mean, we should listen to them and try and understand the logic that they're talking about, but there's always differing opinions. And especially when somebody of renown adopts a specific theory. For example, Elon Musk adopting the idea that we're living in a simulation, it carries a lot of weight because he's so well known and he's talented and he's achieved all these great things. So most people think, oh, well, then he must be right that we're living in a simulation. Well, this is why you should back up and really examine the argument for what it's based on. And that particular argument, for example, the idea of a simulation is based on nothing. It's just wordplay. So let's look again. Another one is on page 171. It says, this is the author speaking. He says on page 171, it seems to me that if one perseveres with the principle of sufficient reason and demands a rational explanation for nature, then we have no choice but to seek that explanation in something beyond or outside the physical world, in something metaphysical. Because, as we have seen, a contingent physical universe cannot contain within itself an explanation for itself. And this is referring to what he was talking about earlier, so I'm not going to go into all the details about that. But the author is saying, well, based on all the, the reasoning and the logic that I've been talking about, it seems that the only way we can have a rational explanation for nature is that there is something beyond or outside the physical world, something metaphysical. And then we go further down on page 171, and he says, naturally, the theologians argue that the creative agency that provides an explanation for the universe is God, God with capital G. But what sort of agency would such a being be? And then he goes off into all these explanations or different definitions of God that are anything but a personal, traditional God. But he does come back to it a little later, and I'll mention that shortly. And again, he talks about Leibniz on page 172, 173, who I believe was a theist, and talks about the world achieves maximum variety based on this purpose, and it also brings up the objection of the problem of evil. And Voltaire made fun of Leibniz because of the existence of evil in the world. And that's the argument which always gets returned to amongst both theologians, philosophers, mathematicians, you name it. Anybody that starts to recognize the perfection of creation, they quickly eventually stumble upon that issue. And so I'll probably talk a little bit more about that a little bit later, but I'll just finish with one more point from page 178, and that is there we go. The demands of rationality seem to compel us towards an image of God as the ultimate explanation of the world. That's the author speaking on page 178. The demands of rationality seem to compel us towards an image of God as the ultimate explanation of the world. However, there's a difficulty about relating this God to a contingent, changing universe. Contingent just means dependent on other factors, especially a universe containing beings with free will. And then he goes on to quote an atheist philosopher. This is what the second major philosophical conundrum that they come up against, and that is a God that has perfect control over everything, at the same time existing free will. So he doesn't use the word predestination, but you could say the problem of predestination versus free will, and the problem of a magnificently created universe that has evil within it. Those are the two major philosophical problems that have arisen so far in the book, and I've only got about a third of the way left, and so these are not new concepts. They've been concepts been around since the time of Plato, and philosophers have always had a hard time dealing with them and explaining them, and individuals have a hard time dealing with them. And yet, I believe that they are much more easily addressed, much more easily reconciled by a cursory reading of the four Gospels. And maybe I'll try and cover that in a later video. But for now, I'll just let you know that these topics are discussed at length from the perspective of current scientists, current physicists, and mathematicians, and it gets into quite a lot of detail, which if that interests you, great. If it doesn't, it's only going to, me trying to regurgitate it is only going to be boring for you, so I'm not going to do that here. But I will get through this. I've got about a third left, and we'll see if there are any other interesting concepts that come up. Currently, those are the only ones that come up, talking about reality as a simulation, which, as I already mentioned, is simply a bit of a cop-out to our existence. And then the two major philosophical problems that I've already mentioned, the problem of evil and the problem of free will versus predestination. Those things are the main themes that have jumped out of the book so far, which make for interesting discussion. So I hope that helps. If you happen to save yourself time, and I'm trying to do review of books to provide some type of benefit to you, the viewer, as some type of service, and I hope you find value in that. Otherwise, sorry, I don't have much on this particular video. A little bit of a boring video for you, but I can always tell you that I love you. God loves you. I hope you have a fantastic day, to try and give you that little boost of encouragement to make it worth your while to watch anything that I produce is that, yes, things can get better. Yes, God is on our side. Yes, He cares about us. Yes, He wants you to prosper. That I believe with all my heart. All the study that I've done in my life has not changed that one iota. And I'm continuing to study. I'm continuing to try and learn. And I hope that you are learning and growing as a human being, growing as a better person, which is the goal that I have for myself and the goal that I have for anybody that I happen to meet, that I could be a blessing to them or an encouragement to them. And I'd like to leave this world a little bit better than I found it. So I try and improve my mind, improve my life so that I can be self-sufficient, so that I can be a blessing to other people. And I hope that the videos that I'm making are a blessing to you. I thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic day. I'll talk to you again real soon, okay? Take care. Bye-bye now.